This week on the Baseline Podcast, Josh and I are joined by Joe Ditullio from the Game Haus, and we are going to be talking to him about NFL draft prospects, what he thought of this last NFL draft, the winners, the losers. We also discuss Notre Dame football. We discuss what he thinks about the current college landscape and what's going to happen in the future. All that and so much more coming up on the Baseline Podcast. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Baseline Podcast. I'm Ben. He's Josh. We are back. And we're back with another guest. Josh, we're on a roll. We're just bringing in people left and right. So
three straight episodes, three straight guests.
I know. So Josh, why don't you go ahead and introduce our guests and then let's get going.
Yeah. So today we are being joined by Joe Ditullio, I believe the director of sports over from the Game Haus. We go back a ways. I used to be an editor and a writer for the Game Haus and management there. And Joe's been leading the charge over there, big time NFL and NBA draft expert. But Joe, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing awesome. Happy to be here, talk some football, man. Can't wait for it to come back.
Yeah. One thing that I really like about Joe, and we're going to talk about NFL draft, is he's industry standard, very accurate when it comes to NFL mock drafts. Like, I think really good mock drafts tend to be around 20 to 25%, and Joe's tend to rank like in the top 10 in media. So I don't know how you do it, Joe, but I imagine there's a lot of grind, a lot of film study, a lot of paying attention to what some teams are saying. How do you do it, man?
Yeah, it's just keeping your ear to the ground, listening to the rumors, picking out which ones are smoke screens. It's tough, but that's mostly it for the mock drafts. But also, yeah, you're right. Like watching the tape and making sure that you're not missing anything is huge too. So I usually just release the last mock draft like the day of the draft because everything changes so quickly. But that's usually what I do. I just kind of follow what people are saying is going to happen, kind of see some guys that I like that might go higher and some good fits, and usually works out okay. Some years not so good, but usually works out pretty good.
Yeah. I think the other thing with mock drafts too is really trying to think of what the team will do and not necessarily what you would do in that situation, because that tends to be two very different things sometimes.
I mean, Josh and I got, we need to have some of that because Josh and I are three freaking mock drafts are about as worse as it can get.
And the thing about each of those mocks is that every week it seemed like there were two new trades or some other new development or a player injury, like David Ojabo's injury. So naturally he's going to slide. And then the Eagles had some trades, the Saints had some trades. So it was like, okay, well, now this guy's not going to go here because this team doesn't need this kind of a guy. And yeah, it just the day of the draft, I feel like is when you put it all together and you're just like, all right, we know everything now. Hopefully nothing else drastically changes. But collectively, I feel like a lot of people thought the New York Jets were the main winners of this draft. Other honorable mentions have been like the Eagles, the Ravens. Were some of your bigger winners, Joe, as far as teams go this draft?
Yeah, Jets are definitely the biggest winner. As you said, it's just so many impact players they got. I mean, starting off with Ahmad Sauce Gardner from Cincinnati, just didn't give up a touchdown in college. I mean, crazy. Even at Cincinnati, the AAC, it's not the greatest competition, but there's some solid receivers right now in the NFL. Gabriel Davis, I think he covered, who's the fantasy darling this year. Everyone wants him in fantasy. He's going to be really good for them. Garrett Wilson after that. You get Breece Hall, Jermaine Johnson. It kind of sets everything up now for them because they kind of have a solid roster now. I mean, it's on Zach Wilson to help this team improve. He showed flashes at the end of last year, kind of showing his potential and everything, but he's got to put it all together and use all these weapons they've given him. I do like we said with the Ravens too. They didn't pick for need as much as they picked for value. Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum are two top 15 players on my board. And just guys that feel like they're Ravens forever. Guys are going to be in the Ravens uniforms for 10, 15 years. And, everyone is a fan of a team in the division is just going to hate them. And then the New York Giants, too, I like, too. I mean, getting Kayvon Thibodeau, I didn't think he was going to drop that far. There was kind of some weird rumors about how much he loved football. But when he shows up on the field, he's such an impact player. And they get some more offensive linemen, too. So those were the three teams I was really impressed by in this draft. I think it's I don't know, like I said, I think the Jets definitely did the best, but those other two teams aren't too far behind either.
Yeah. You mentioned Ahmad Sauce Gardner there. That's a player that Ben has been super high on.
I was high on him.
I've leaned a little bit more towards Derek Stingley in terms of the cornerbacks. I just think he's played a little bit better competition, but obviously there is the injury concern there. Which player would you prefer, I guess, based on what you've seen on film? What are maybe some differences between these two corners?
Yeah, I prefer Derek Stingley, but it's a tougher evaluation, right? Because he wasn't fully healthy since his freshman year. But as a freshman on that 2019 LSU team, I mean, he's one of the best players on that defense. They had tons of guys going in the NFL. So I think he's just kind of better at matching up man to man and mirroring the man that he's covering. Sauce Gardner, that lankiness though, you can't teach that, right? So he's got those long arms, and I think he can battle pretty well. So I would say that both of them are going to be really good pros. I prefer Stingley, assuming he's healthy, but I mean, there's also concerns like long term with this health, because I believe the injury he had is something that could and has lingered for other guys in the past. I think it was was it a lift strength injury? I believe it was.
Something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm a little concerned about that. I think Sauce Gardner might be the safer pick because of that, but I think Stingley has the higher ceiling.
I mean, it's honestly just the Sauce name. I mean, that just gives him like bonus points. Like you know how many sauces he's going to make in his career? He's going to have his own sauce line. Like we all know that like these weird sauces are going to be coming out of New York bars and New York restaurants are just going to be full of these things. And if he then does terrible, he has a whole sauce career ahead of him. I'm just saying, it's genius.
He had that. I don't know if you guys saw, but he had the sauce chain during the draft. And I'm like,
yes.
Well, that's got to be a marketing. Someone should have paid him to make it like an A1 bottle or something. You know, should have done something like that.
Yeah. I think if he's just Ahmad Gardner, he might just be a second round pick, but the sauce name definitely boost you around there. I want to kind of talk about Kayvon Thibodeaux too, because for a while there, he was considered the guy that was going to be the number one pick in this draft. And then it kind of moved to Aiden Hutchinson. And then really the day before the draft, I think is when Trayvon Walker started getting all the rumors that he was going to go number one. And then eventually we do see him number one there. But before the combine, they were talking about Trayvon Walker being like middle of the first round. Now, in your eyes, Joe, what do you think went on here? Do you think this was maybe a case where NFL teams have been high on Trayvon Walker since day one, and the media and the scouts were just kind of hyped up with these other guys? Or was there something you think that went on? Maybe some of this news about Kayvon Thibodeaux not really liking football, maybe Aiden Hutchinson not being an absolutely freak athlete, and Trayvon kind of boosting his stock at the combine did something. What do you think was the reason the Jags went with Trayvon there first?
Well, first, I think Trent Baalke for the Jags maybe hasn't done the best job in drafts and in being a GM in the past. So you gotta bring that up a little bit. But
valid.
I think that he just killed it at the combine, and they just they like the workout warrior type sometimes, and that's what did it. I mean, you think yes, like Georgia had a lot of good players on the defense last year, right? But he didn't produce. You would think that like, hey, Jordan Davis in the middle of the defense is getting double teamed. That should mean Trayvon Walker should do better. It just didn't happen, and that's something that like you have to like think next level. Can he be better than he was in college, where his defensive unit for the Jaguars isn't going to be as good as Georgia's was relatively to the competition. Right. So you got to see what's going on. I think they just saw him and saw how athletic he was and decided that was the move. But in all reality, Trayvon Walker wasn't even top 2 or 3 player on that defense for Georgia last year. If you look at production, if you look at just top to bottom, how much talent they had. So I think they kind of just, went for the athletic traits. That does happen in the draft a lot. Teams will go for those athletic traits and try to mold these players into something better. And maybe he can be a better pro than he can be a college player.
Yeah, definitely will be interesting to follow that. And then kind of moving with that number one pick, I believe you had Kyle Hamilton number one on your big board. Is that correct?
I did. Yes.
All right. Now, with that being said, if you were the Jags, would you have taken Kyle Hamilton number one, or do you feel there was maybe a bigger need or maybe a better edge rusher that they could have got instead?
Yeah, I would have gone Thibodeaux the way the roster was currently constructed. I think Cam across from Josh Allen, the defensive end, could have been pretty good. I'm not saying Walker can't be good with him as well, but I also wouldn't have franchise tagged Cam Robinson. I don't think it's really going to work out for him long term. He's not worth the money for a franchise tag. And I probably would have gone with one of the offensive linemen, because there were several good offensive linemen in this draft. I mean, that doesn't always happen where the top of the draft has these guys who are ready to go. So I probably would have done that. I wouldn't have franchise tagged him and gone offensive lineman. They chose to keep Cam Robinson, who I think in an average tackle at best. So that's what I would have done. But, Thibodeaux would have been the pick if they would have done that already.
Yeah, definitely was some talk there for, I think, a little bit too. I mentioned just Kayvon and Hutchinson, but there was some talk there about maybe Evan Neal going. But I think once Cam Robinson got franchise tag, that erased all doubt of at least the position that they were going to take there.
It's also interesting for me, I think of Jacksonville, right? And I think I look at that Walker pick, and I think I've said this before, that I think they're trying to get so out of the urban era that they're trying to do anything that is different than what has been happening. But to me, I look at Trevor Lawrence, a guy who literally could make or break like your franchise in the next 5 years or so, right? And even though I had a defensive end going there, and I had it just was thinking what the team would do. Realistically, if I'm sitting there, I agree with you, you have a tackle, just get one of them, just grab one of them and you stick them there, because Lawrence is your money bucket. If he goes down, what's happening, right? You don't have, I think, we don't know what the run game is going to be like. We don't know. There's a lot of unknowns with this Jacksonville team. And it kind of reminds me of when, now I feel like the Browns are like this again, but kind of that way of we don't know what the quarterback's like. Let's try to get everything else that at least is semi good. And so I don't know. I agree with you when you said it. It's Evan Neal was just seemed to make sense if you're thinking of protecting Trevor Lawrence, if you're thinking about giving someone that is athletic, is just big dude. But yeah, it's interesting. And my thought on that is, my question for you is, do you think that this was a Jaguars saying, hey, we just want to make sure we have a surefire defense? Or is this them almost saying too, did we really know what we were going to go get? Because part of me goes they just were you know what, this looks like a great pick in our minds, but you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I think they kind of wanted a little bit of both worlds here, right? They wanted the defense to be better, obviously. And they wanted the offensive line to be okay. So that's why they franchise tag Cam Robinson, take Trayvon Walker. And I think ultimately, too, the Jaguars have missed on some defensive ends. I mean, Caleb Von Chason, that's why they're taking Trayvon Walker. Walker. That's why they took him this year. But yeah, it's just I don't know. I think they're just trying to have an okay defense and an okay offense, but some of their decision making skills have not been the best either. They're going with Christian Kirk with that much money too on the offense. I think it could be below average offense and defense next year. It probably doesn't help Trevor Lawrence develop. And I don't think all the time you can have the best of both worlds when your options are franchise tagging an average left tackle and, drafting someone who I had as a very, very late first round pick in Trayvon Walker.
Wow. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think even Josh and I on our first mock, I don't think either of us even had him in the top 20, 25. I can't remember.
I think he might have been middle, around that 14 to 15 range. Once you started getting into the Eagles and stuff like that, a team that could maybe use an edge. If I remember right, I could be wrong, but I feel like it was that middle teens range.
All I know is that Sauce was right for me. So I just want to drop that out again.
You did get that right, but I did get Stingley going first before him, right? I just didn't think that it would be to that team.
Totally get started.
I didn't think it'd be third overall, though. Yeah. Joe, kind of transitioning to losers of the draft. Maybe the Jaguars are one of your biggest losers because of this pick, but I also thought it was kind of odd, not really odd, a reach that Washington jumped up and got Jahan Dotson at 16. I thought that was a pretty big reach. I thought Atlanta taking Drake London, the first wide receiver off the board there at 8, was a mistake also. Do you agree with me on that, or were there some bigger losers here in this draft, you think?
Yeah, Jaguars were up there. Washington did surprise me. I like Jahan Dotson. I'm he's going to be a day 2 receiver, and he's going to he's going to fit in well and be a productive pro, but the value of it is just not good to trade up for Jahan Dotson. I really didn't think so. If you're late first round, maybe, but they traded up for him. And let's just say with Carson Wentz at quarterback next year, there's a lot of question marks with that team. It's not like Jahan Dotson's going to fix that either. So I think they were definitely questionable. And yeah, I'm like you. I was way lower on Drake London than pretty much consensus. He was very productive at USC, but they have Harrell as their offensive coordinator. He's just all about throwing the ball over. There was reports from some people in the industry that he was going to run very, very slow at the combine. He didn't end up running because of his injury. That did surprise me. I mean, in a sense, I think he could still be a good pro, especially with Kyle Pitts being a freak and taking a lot of the attention of the defenses. But he also doesn't have the greatest quarterback situation either. So I was cool with Atlanta going receiver, but I just thought Garrett Wilson was a lot better than him, and even some of the other guys too.
Yeah, me and Ben are really high on Garrett Wilson. We both thought he was wide receiver one. Sounds like you might be in that same company. What are some things that you saw from Wilson that you really like that could make him a good pro?
I just remember watching him. I think it was his first year at Ohio State, and just guy came out of nowhere and just made some incredible catches. And to be able to do that so early in his career, and then he developed the ability to run routes a little bit better, just a little bit crisper. I think that really did set him apart. He's a little shifty. He can run after the catch. He's a guy that, will he ever be a top 5 receiver in the league? Maybe not. Maybe not like a Jamar Chase came on the scene like this past year. But I think he's going to be a really solid NFL receiver. And I think he had way less question marks than just about any other receivers in the draft.
Do you think him moving from after his freshman, we all know his freshman year, kind of the same as what Smith and Jigba did with Ohio State last year, playing the slot, right? And then he moved outside. Do you think moving outside was, because I don't think he is a slot. I think he's not, I don't think that's what he is. Do you think moving outside for some of these receivers coming out of college, if let's say they played slot first 2 years and they move outside and they can show they can dominate there, does that bump up their stock, or does that, or if they don't succeed, does that hurt their stock, or they're like, okay, well, we know they're a good slot receiver? That's always what I wonder, because with Olave, it's the same thing. Where do you play him? Do you play him inside? Do you play him outside? There's a lot of that getting thrown around as well.
Yeah, I definitely think if you can show that you can win in the slot and outside the slot against different types of corners, whether it's number one corner on the outside, whether it's a slot corner, it only helps you. If you end up not doing as well, if you start in the slot and end up not doing so well on the outside, it's a little bit of a question mark, and it might hurt your draft value. Slot receivers don't typically go as early, obviously, but I do think if you can show that you can do both, it's just how the NFL is working. We have guys who are now big slot receivers. They put some of their big receivers in there for a mismatch. If there's a nickel corner who's smaller, they put, the Julian Edelman type guys is still in the slot. So if you can show, you can do multiple things like that. I think it always helps.
Yeah, for sure.
I would like to talk quarterbacks with you, Joe, and nobody was really high on many of the quarterbacks in this draft, but we all kind of assumed that there'd be 4 or 5 going in that first round, just because that's the nature of the NFL and how they look at quarterbacks. It's like, if a team needs a quarterback, they're going to take one, and they don't really care if that quarterback is a true first round pick or not. That's just kind of how quarterbacks go. But Kenny Pickett was the only first round quarterback. And then there wasn't even another one taken until that third round with Desmond Ridder and Malik Willis, I believe both went that third round.
Desmond.
Did that shock you at all? And who is your QB1 in this class?
All right. So yeah, it did shock me. I thought that we're all saying, hey, it's a down year for quarterbacks, but every year in history, right? EJ Manuel went in the first round. What was it, 2013 maybe?
Yeah. 2013 draft, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they always rise up the boards, and I just thought someone would try to take one. I think I mocked 2 in my last mock draft. I'd have to go check that. 2 or 3 in my last mock draft, and I was like, this is what always happens. Quarterbacks get pushed up. I get it. It's the position that has the most value. So I was pretty shocked about that, and then I was also shocked that the Steelers took Kenny Pickett too. I like Kenny Pickett. He's a solid guy, but everyone's bringing up the small hands. They're bringing up the fact that he had waited until his senior year, his 5th year, senior year, or whatever, to be productive. He's kind of an older prospect, and while he kind of has that I can make plays out of nowhere while keeping my eyes downfield, and the fake slide obviously at Pittsburgh too, which was awesome, even though probably illegal now. He just really surprised me. That was the pick. I would have gone more risk taker. I would have gone Malik Willis. Personally, I just think he has a higher ceiling with his talents. He's athletic, he can run. At least there's something out there. Most years, I think there's someone who's probably better than Malik Willis and probably wouldn't be in this situation. But if you're gonna all these guys are lottery tickets this year. There's no one who's even a Trevor Lawrence, a Joe Burrow, even someone like a Tua who's still very much out there in the NFL. Maybe good, maybe not. But there's no one even like that. So I was like, if you're going to take the lottery ticket, this is the year to do it. Take Malik Willis. And I was very surprised because it seemed like the Steelers were very interested in Malik Willis pre-draft. It ended up being Kenny Pickett, ended up staying at home.
Yeah.
Yeah. Were you shocked, though? Were you shocked that Malik Willis went that far down? Like, are you shocked that, I mean, I was very high on Malik and that talent, or that really projection talent, right? Like, I'm sitting there and looking, and I'm like, this guy just kept falling. And I'm going, what do you think it was because of being at Liberty? Do you think it was a post pre-draft workout? Do you think it was bowl results or whatever? Because from whatever thing I was hearing, like, people were kind of like, man, this guy's got a lot of talent. He can throw the ball. He can run. What was it? Like, what do you think kind of these teams were like, yeah, I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I all the reports on him were great. Like, hey, he's a good person, good leader off the field. I really think that Liberty didn't have enough around him to let him show all his talents. Like, yeah, there were flashes, there were highlights, and he was doing a lot, but the offensive line wasn't that great. And the offense kind of regressed from the year before, too, in terms of like X's and O's. They weren't really letting him air it out as much as they should have. And I think that held him back. Everything else seemed like behind the scenes, like he was ready to go, ready to be a good quarterback. So it did very much surprise me that he was like falling in the draft. I'm like, someone take the chance, someone like make him your backup for a year or two, let him learn, But that's the only thing I could think of is just that the offense wasn't that good, and like the X's and O's part of it kind of held him back.
Mm-hmm. Interesting, yeah.
I think where he fell to Tennessee right there with Ryan Tannehill in front of him, that's going to be the better fit for him in the long run. Yeah. Like, we see some of these guys like Zach Wilson or Justin Fields just go to bad situations, or even Trevor Lawrence, honestly, right now. And it just kind of ruins any kind of future they could have had. So sometimes I think that approach of just being able to sit back a little bit and get to learn the playbook, no pressure really, kind of that. So I think that's going to be good for Malik in the long run. Kind of wrapping up this year's draft, Joe. Any sleeper picks, any guys that fell, or maybe some guys that teams maybe should have been higher on? Like, one guy to me that I'm really excited to see how he turns out is Calvin Austin from Memphis. He was that guy that kind of took the combine by storm with being only 5'8", but I mean, one of the fastest guys there, one of the strongest guys there, one of the best jumpers there, like just absolute freak athlete, legend on the track too over there at Memphis. So I don't know how necessarily that'll translate to the NFL, but I'm excited to see what he can do. Any guys like that in your book that you're looking forward to watching this year?
Yeah, love that one. Love the mid-round wide receivers. This was a deep wide receiver draft, so there's plenty of them. I think the guys that, again, these are all lottery tickets, but a lot of these guys proved they were really good. So one of the guys I really like is Jalen Tolbert for the Cowboys. He played at South Alabama. He's going to get an early role with the Cowboys too. Obviously, Amari Cooper is now in Cleveland. Michael Gallup still has recovering from that injury, so he's going to be thrust right into it. But he was really, really good at South Alabama, and I think just the early opportunity to get playing time. There's not the pressure of being the number one receiver. That's CeeDee Lamb. When Michael Gallup comes back, they can kind of move those guys around in and out of the slot. I think they can all probably play in and out of the slot. So I think he's one to watch out for. I would say Romeo Doubs, who the Packers drafted in the 4th round. He's a really big deep threat, and just, we know the Packers need wide receiver help. Aaron Rodgers has been saying it for years. They obviously got Christian Watson 1st round, but more sleeper Romeo Doubs. He's a deep threat who I think Aaron Rodgers, on some of those deep balls he throws, I think he's gonna be able to hit them. Just have to see how he fits into the rotation of receivers they have there. And then another Packers guy I really like their 4th round, because both these guys are 4th round picks, Zach Tom. He's a guard center from Wake Forest, but he actually played left tackle to start his career, and he played really well at left tackle. He succeeded at every portion on the line of scrimmage, and it kind of reminds me in a way of what they've done with Elton Jenkins, who's become one of the best linemen in the league. He just kind of moves around on the line. He plays well everywhere. I think he can be that type of player for them as well.
Yeah, I like what you were saying there, because I think what I hear in your voice is versatility, right? Like, the late round sleepers are guys that are versatile, which I think is very key. And I do have a draft question before we move on from the draft, because Josh knows how high I was on this guy, and I never could figure out where to put him in my rankings, because I know there's like a relation to it, because I kind of know him a little bit. But Bernard Raymond, who went to the Colts, who's originally from Austria, who, it's so funny because the guy started as a tight end. He obviously moved to tackle. We all know how that can kind of go. It can go left or right, depends on what. What are your thoughts on Bernard Raymond? Because for me, like, I think he's he's kind of a sleeper, because no one really talks about him. It's kind of like, oh, the Colts drafted him. What are your thoughts on him? Because I think that's a guy that could end up being a very good lineman if he's developed right because of his quickness and some of the things like that.
Yeah, one of those guys that I think that you're right, because he played tight end first. I think he was doing okay, and they decided to shift him over. I think he got overvalued at points during the NFL draft process, but then he kind of fell. And I think now you're right. Like, I think he's a good value because he has that experience of, I guess, the quickness and the experience of playing tight end. He moves in. He still has a lot of technical work to do. But again, if you have that quickness, you'd rather work with players on their technical aspects of their game rather than try to teach them how to be quick. And I think he's a guy that developmental tackles, man. If you can get guys like that who have the traits, then there's definitely good stuff that can come out of it if you have a good offensive line coach.
Austria being proud. Make Austria proud. That's all I got to say.
For sure. So kind of discussing some college prospects now, Joe. We'll start with the quarterbacks. And I think the majority of people, obviously,
make sure you say majority. Make sure you say majority.
Yes. Pro Football Focus doesn't agree with us here, but I think collectively everybody would say that Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are going to be the two best quarterbacks in college football this year, the two top QB prospects for next year's NFL draft. I think Ben and I would lean more towards CJ being number one. I think he just, in terms of arm talent, is a little bit better. He can throw all around the field and deep downfield. To me, Bryce Young just kind of likes to dink and dunk a little bit, stay in the middle of the field, doesn't really go outside too much. But one thing that he is better than CJ at right now, I think he just has more of a dog mentality. Like, he's got better toughness. He's more willing to use his legs to go and make that 3rd and 3 run if he needs to get away from like a linebacker, put his body on the line. CJ, I think, still needs to work out some of those things. But between the two, if you're an NFL GM, who are you taking?
Oh, Stroud. Yeah, I think they're somewhat close. They're somewhat close, but I think like Stroud's. I think he's a clear step above. He's made some really good throws down the field. I just haven't seen the same amount of throws down the field, like kind of like you're mentioning, Josh. That Stroud has just made way more throws than Young in that regard. I think that game against Utah in the Rose Bowl, where he was just putting it on guys. Marvin Harrison Jr., who was came out of everyone knew who he was at Ohio State as a recruit, but the other guy sat out the bowl game. He comes in and steps in. He's got so many good receivers too, but you're right. Like he just is so poised. He can hit the really accurate, hit his spots, do everything he needs to in that regard. I do like what you're saying with Young. Like, the competitive fire might be there more. He showed that clutch gene he had against Auburn with that big drive to seal up the Heisman, basically. I'm interested to see what Bryce Young does this year, though, because he has so many new faces there in terms of wide receiver targets. We saw that was kind of a big difference in the national championship game. A lot of the receivers were hurt. They had to put in new guys who just weren't quite ready yet. And I'm going to be interested to see what he does this year with these new guys. It might take a couple games for him to get used to them. I think he'll end up just being fine, but I do think Stroud is just a little bit ahead of him right now.
Yeah, I know a lot of people will point to the fact that Bryce won the Heisman and stuff, but to me, if CJ didn't have that game against Oregon and he didn't miss that one game due to injury, like, I can't remember who it was against. It wasn't anybody really noteworthy, but it was just kind of like a lot of people didn't come on to Stroud until later in the year, and that might have ultimately hurt him for at least Heisman. But I feel like the gap between Bryce Young and CJ Stroud to the rest of the pack definitely is very large. Like, there's a lot of guys you could throw there at like 3 and 4, and you may not get too much argument from that. Some guys that I'm hearing thrown around here for the NFL specific, at least. So I just want to talk NFL prospects before we talk like college football quarterbacks. But Will Levis's name's getting thrown around a lot. That's a guy that people are really excited about. And then his name escapes me, but NC State's quarterback, Sam Hartman, is another one from Wake Forest. Who are some of these other guys that we should be keeping an eye on that might move up the draft boards this year?
Yeah, Devin Leary is the NC State guy. I actually really like him. Only 5 interceptions last year. NC State to their best season in years. And, and it's a little bit of preview for our college football talk later, but they get like 20 key players back for this year. So that's the guy to watch out for. I really do think he can be really big. He made the big throws against Clemson to beat them last year. I think ACC is really the place to look after Stroud and Young, because you have Leary, you have DJ Uiagalelei, who had a terrible season last year, and the X's and O's are really bad. But the talent was there. That's the thing you don't worry about. Maybe he can bounce back. Tyler Van Dyke came in for Miami and played really well. He's a guy I think is in the running to be the third quarterback. Who's going to end up as a third quarterback in this class? Could be so many different people. Spencer Rattler. He's got to bounce back. I think he'll do okay at South Carolina. But I don't know. I think he's got a lot to prove, because I think the progression he showed from the start of his first year as a starter at Oklahoma to the end was really good. And then they just couldn't run the ball. And that took so much away from what they were able to do. And then at the end of the year, Caleb Williams gets in and he can run a little bit better than Spencer Rattler, and Kennedy Brooks came out of nowhere too. So I think he has a chance to do okay. But yeah, and then Phil Jerkovich, Boston College, Brennan Armstrong, Virginia, and Sam Hartman, Wake Forest, are all guys that put up points. And I mean, who knows who's going to end up with this class? There's some guys that I've seen that people are higher on than me though too, like Will Levis. I don't see it quite yet. He's got a strong arm. He's made some plays for Kentucky, but he locked into Wan'Dale Robinson so much and almost hurt the team a little bit last year. So he's got to show that next step. And then Anthony Richardson from Florida is very, very, very talented, but he hasn't put.
We're excited about him.
Yes, you should be. But like people were saying, like he's like number 1 quarterback or number 3 quarterback behind these guys. I'm just like, that's cool. Let's see improvement this year, because the talent is there. The talent is there, but the tape isn't yet.
My question is then, what do you think the GMs right now in the NFL today? So as they're getting ready for this next season, as they're going through, they're going to watch CJ Stroud, they're going to watch Young, they're going to watch all these guys. What is the top like 3 things you really think that these GMs look for in a quarterback, saying like, hey, we're going to put our money behind you, or we're going to invest in you because we think in a few years you're going to have these 3 things nailed down?
Yeah, I think it's Josh Allen's changed the game with this, because I think in the past, if you had accuracy issues, everyone said you can't really teach accuracy, and he's proven that's a myth too. So I do think NFL GMs tend to look at the physical traits. Can they run? Can they throw? Do they have a strong arm? And that's what Josh Allen had. He had that most powerful arm in the draft that year. He was able to scramble a little, enough to keep the chains moving. He's not the fastest guy out there or anything, more of a Cam Newton scrambler. But I think those 2 things are like the things they look for much more than they used to. Accuracy is always my thing. Like I think if you're accurate, kind of like CJ Stroud, they'll find you. Like you'll have time. Everyone who's in the college level, 90% of the guys who get in the NFL draft have enough of an arm to not be a liability, and that's what I like. But I do think Josh Allen just changed everything with that.
Interesting.
That is crazy. Yeah. The other thing too, I think Josh Allen changed, is that everybody is trying to find that next big small school quarterback. That's why guys like Carson Strong might get reached on, or why Trey Lance might even be a guy that gets drafted 3rd overall. Like everybody's looking for like that next Josh Allen. I think you're 100% on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's some good football players at the lower levels, and it's kind of more of a risk, obviously, in North Dakota State and everything. But if you get a guy who's dicing up FCS level competition, maybe winning some FBS games like that, I think you take your chances on guys like Josh Allen at Wyoming and some of those North Dakota State guys who've been drafted early in the last 10 years or so.
Yeah. So maybe not necessarily NFL prospects, but in terms of college football players and maybe some guys that won't be draft eligible, let's just talk college quarterbacks for this season. I'm very high on Hendon Hooker, quarterback from Tennessee. I think he could be the 3rd best quarterback in college football, like just in terms of like college production, right? Like maybe not the best NFL prospect. I ran a poll on Twitter, and not a lot of people agree with me though. 14% agreed with me out of 102 votes. So I really thought he had about 3,000 yards last year, 31 TDs, 3 interceptions in his first season with Josh Heupel, another about 600 on the ground. So I think there's a lot to like about Hendon Hooker. Am I delusional, Joe? What do you think of Hendon Hooker? And is he at least the top 10 QB? Because that's another guy that was left off of PFF's list.
No, I like Hendon Hooker. I think he's a top 10 quarterback. I think he's a guy who, again, not in Stroud and Young's level, but he's very much in play to be the 3rd best quarterback in the NFL draft too. He's big, he's strong arm. And you mentioned the stats. Remember, he didn't even start the year. They had Joe Milton, the Michigan transfer, start the year.
Right.
And that wasn't smart. Hendon Hooker had already proven at Virginia Tech that he was like somewhat good, and Milton at Michigan. And
he played at Michigan. He played at Michigan, so that's just normal.
Yeah, that's been their biggest weakness here. They haven't had a quarterback under Harbaugh after he was the quarterback whisperer for Luck, apparently, right? So,
I mean, but my question too is going off what Josh said, Please don't tell me that you think Caleb Williams is anywhere close right now to Young, to Stroud. Am I seeing these ratings as like, do people really think that like he is better talent wise and production wise, maybe not production wise, but talent wise than CJ Stroud and Young? Because when I look at them all play, I watched all three like games. Like I watched them back to back to back of all three guys, different games. It just doesn't even seem like he's on the same level as these two guys. I don't know what people are seeing, if it's just a projection, because the projection was that CJ Stroud won't even be an All-American this year, which I think is just mind-boggling to me. But what's your opinion on that? Because Caleb Williams to me is not, I don't have him as a guy that's in the top, maybe even top 4, top 5.
I'm with you. He just hasn't proved it yet. I'm really big on having to prove it before we start projecting. That's why, again, Anthony Richardson too. I just don't think he's proven it yet. I want him and all these guys who like have the potential to prove it first. But we've gotten into this thing with college football where it's like everyone's trying to find the next best thing or trying to find the next guy instead of just focusing on what they've done so far. And it's a huge problem in the media world. Like, yes, it's really cool to be the guy who's like, oh, I was the first one to see Andrew Luck back when he was a 7th grader or something. But we're going too far. Like, you know. He's a guy that, you know, this year I think he could end up being that way. He could be the 3rd best quarterback in college football. I don't think anyone's touching Stroud or Young, but he has a lot to prove before he gets to that level. Like before I can even say that. He's, to me, possibly top 10. I'd have to crunch the numbers, but I mentioned all those ACC guys. All those ACC guys before, like, have way better stats, have proven it more than him. So if I'm ranking the best quarterbacks in college football this year, he's going to be below those guys. So it might maybe fringe top 10, but definitely not top 5.
Yeah, I think what might be playing into that too is just recruiting rankings, right? Like, I think that's the reason why a lot of people are super high on Spencer Rattler. Like this was the number 1 QB in his class, a guy that was talked about being a Heisman candidate quarterback. And so a lot of people just can't seem to move past that. Like what they're seeing on the field isn't lining up with that, but they're like, well, like the rankings said this. So it's like, he must be that. And maybe that's kind of what Caleb Williams is dealing with.
Quinn Ewers factor too.
I was actually just going to mention Quinn Ewers. Like
ridiculous.
This was a guy
$1 million.
This was a guy that got a perfect rating from, 24/7 for the recruiting. And now we're talking about him being like in a QB battle with Hudson Card, which
and then
I don't
Archie
really know.
Manning, possibly.
Eventually, yeah, once he comes into town. But I don't know how much of that's just media talk and how much of that is just Sarkisian not wanting to reveal who his quarterback is yet. What have you seen from Quinn Ewers? We really don't have a lot of college tape. So that's really kind of a tough question to ask. Did you see anything in high school that you thought was special though, or anything like that?
Yeah, he's got that arm talent that everyone wants, man. He's got the strong arm. I saw him make some pretty good throws, but yeah, same thing like you were saying. Like he's not taking enough steps. It's not his fault too. Remember, he graduated early, went to Ohio State. Stroud won the job, and as much as some Ohio State fans wanted them to bench Stroud for Ewers, like it just wasn't going to happen. Like he didn't have any time to prepare to do anything.
Where are they living? Dear Lord, are they living under the rocks? Like what?
I don't know if you guys remember, but that first CJ Stroud game was in Minnesota last year.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Minnesota,
it was
yeah.
just a
Twitter.
Oh my word.
They weren't happy about that.
But what are you
half.
gonna do? You're gonna bench him for a guy that's never actually played. Like you're not gaining anything by doing that. And then you also have Kyle McCord, who, by the way, is also a freak. So why
5-star himself? Yeah.
Why are we passing up? But
no, yeah, you're right. It just I don't even think Ewers even made the first trip with them to Minnesota, or maybe he didn't dress. It was one of the two. So there was no chance he was getting benched for him. And what are you going to do? Stroud? I mean, obviously, you got to be patient when you have guys like Justin Fields come in and produce right away. Sometimes you have new guys like Stroud who just need to get a couple reps in and be used to it, and people just go nuts. That's a big college football fan base right there. But
it's a Ohio State fan base.
Ohio State's fan, but you said it, not me.
I'll be honest.
Yeah, but Ewers, yeah, like I see people like putting him on the all Big 12
ridiculous
second team or third team, and I'm like, the dude hasn't taken more than 2 or 3 snaps in his whole like college career. I can't say that he like. Will he by the end of the year? Could he be on those teams? For sure. Big 12 quarterbacks aren't the greatest this year. They have a lot of transfers coming in, a lot of moving parts. But for right now, I can't say that he is. I mean, for the kid's sake, I hope he does do everything he lives up to. It's really hard to be in that position of being a perfect prospect rating and everything, but nothing yet says that, you know.
Yeah, we got a lot of transfer quarterbacks, Joe. Dylan Gabriel over in Oklahoma, a guy that I really like. You got, we just mentioned yours, so we'll throw him in there as well. Jackson Dart over at Ole Miss, I think, could be another guy that could really break out. And someone else was just off the top of my head, big transfer QB.
Caleb Williams is one of them.
Yeah, I mean, Caleb Williams is another one there too. I was thinking of one other one. Oh, JT Daniels over at West Virginia.
JT Daniels, yeah.
That could be interesting too. Who do you think could, out of these transfer quarterbacks, could potentially have the biggest impact on their team? Maybe not necessarily take them to the playoff. I don't know if any of these transfer quarterbacks are maybe capable of doing that just yet. Maybe Caleb Williams, just because of how much USC did in the offseason and with the strength of the Pac-12. But who do you think could potentially have the biggest impact and the biggest jump into this season?
Yeah, I think there's actually like half the teams in the FBS have a transfer quarterback this year. It's the projected start.
That's right crazy.
Now. Yeah, transfer portal's gone nuts, man. But
it's not transfer portal; it's free agency.
Free agency. Right. Of course, I don't know if you guys saw. It's a little bit off topic. Jordan Addison's not happy with the amount of money he's gotten from USC after the whole.
Oh my word!
It's apparently not living up to the hype. Yeah, like he was supposed to get like the house and I think $3 million and something like that. And the rumor is that didn't really necessarily follow through all the way, so he's a little upset. So that's going to be interesting to follow that, but also maybe some other NIL deals, like these kids getting promised, like Nico's getting like $8 million from Tennessee, and then that one kid that Miami got supposed to get $9 million, and it's like that would. I mean, what do you do when you get there and it's just like, nah, we actually can't give that to you.
You have coaches saying that you don't give money out, but then on camera you have Jimbo Fisher saying, "Hey, those guys up there will be giving you money." It's like, dude, you're an idiot. Stop. What are you doing? Yeah. You're literally lying in front of cameras.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk more about that later in the show for sure. But back to transfer QBs. Half of the FBS has transfer QBs though.
Yeah, I have to pull this. I'll have to pull the tweet or the stat, but it's like 59, 60, like
that's
out
crazy.
of 130 teams. And we'll see what it comes out, like the projected totals, projected starters, what they end up being. But the ones that I think could make a huge impact, JT Daniels. I'm not really sure why Stetson Bennett was the starter last year for Georgia. I mean, yes,
me neither.
Have come up, but like, good for him. They won the national championship. I guess it worked out. You'll take that 100 times out of 100. But JT Daniels was much better. If you remember at the end of the 2020 season, I guess he had led Georgia to a bunch of wins in a row. It looked like he was going to do really well. So I think he can do some damage for West Virginia. Like you said, there's no one going to a team where I'm like, they're going to make the playoffs. So it's kind of tough. Yeah. But JT Daniels can have a really good season. And in their type of spread it out offense, he could have a really big year. Another guy I would say is Cameron Ward. He's going to be the quarterback for Washington State.
Oh yeah,
he transferred up from Incarnate Word, man. He can run, he can throw. Washington State had Jaden DeLaura last year, who transferred to Arizona. I don't know. I guess he just wasn't happy. They had a big need at it. They went for the FCS level. He can be a guy that not just college football, but NFL draft. He could rise up some boards this year if he puts up numbers like he did at Incarnate Word. Yeah.
Heard it here first.
Yeah. Any other kind of outside of QBs, I want to talk a little bit about maybe top NFL prospects in general, because there are some good receivers out here. We mentioned Jordan Addison. I think Jackson Smith and Jigba potentially could be the best receiver in this draft class. Who are some other guys? Bijan Robinson might be the best running back. I believe he is draft eligible. Who are some guys that we should be keeping an eye on, Joe, that probably will be top 10 picks this next coming draft?
All those guys you said are guys to watch out for. Will Anderson, best player in college football. I mean, crazy, man. Crazy what he did last year. Should have been the Heisman too, by the way.
Honestly, yeah. Like, he wasn't even a finalist. Like, and a lot of people were saying, I believe Josh Pate was one of the guys that was super high on Will Anderson last year. And yeah, just they picked Hutchinson for that defensive guy instead, which, I mean, Hutchinson was good last year, but Will Anderson, I mean,
don't get me started.
You look all around the numbers, man. Will Anderson was that dude.
So I'm still salty about the Desmond Howard comment. Okay, I'm still a little hurting on that one. So I gotta let that one kind of get over.
No, Will Anderson should have. I mean, if we're doing best player in college football, I think Tim or Jordan Davis may have been. Jordan Davis, with how many double teams he drew. I mean, if we're gonna do this like in a vacuum, but we know the voters are all quarterbacks. They're all gonna vote for quarterbacks. That's how it's always gonna go. But he's one to watch out for. He's going to be a very good edge rusher. And, it's hard to say like generational anymore because Like, I don't know if he's better than Chase Young was a couple of years ago. He's probably in that tier, though, of Chase Young level prospect for an edge rusher. Jalen Carter, who is the new defensive lineman. He played last year a lot for Georgia, too, but the new draft-eligible defensive lineman from Georgia.
The new draft-eligible.
Very athletic for his size.
They're just bringing him out of like the closet. Here, come on, guys. Next one up. Come on.
They're making them under the stadium. They have a factory. They just make these NFL players and put them on the field. It's crazy, but he's gonna be really good too. Other than that, I think there's just a lot of question marks, like more so than past years, which good or bad thing for us. Have some fun trying to find these guys, but like offensive line might not be as good. We have guys like Peter Skoronski, he's okay for Northwestern. We have Paris Johnson for Ohio State, who's came in as a tackle, played guard for them. Now it's going to be about the tackle. It's just, he's like those other guys we talked about. He has to show he can play tackle before he can be seen as a top 10 pick, but he has all the tools to do it. So, but yeah, I think Carter and Anderson are the two easy ones to point out, other than the ones you said, Josh.
What is your thought? What's your thought on Smith and Jigba? Do you think in order, because right now he's in the slot, do you think he needs to stay in the slot because as an Ohio State fan, as someone who is following this team very closely, I think it's stupid if Ohio State moves him out of the slot. I mean, he's a mismatch nightmare. Now, there's part of me that thinks I'm worried that Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. I mean, Brian Hartline's very smart. Brian Day is very smart. I don't want them to move him outside. I feel like that's going to hurt. One is draft stock, and I think two, just production-wise. Do you think for him to be a top 5 pick, does he need to stay where he's at just to produce the numbers to show show that, or does he need to move outside every so often to show versatility? What is your kind of idea behind that for him to be that kind of top 5, top 10 pick that some people are projecting?
Yeah, I think he probably does need to be more outside this year. The key is to win football games for
of course,
coaches, right? So keep him in the slot as much as possible, as long as you're winning games. But when you're up 35-7 against whatever Big Ten team you're beating that week, go move him outside. Let him play against some good corners and get him some big reps. It's kind of the way I would do it. I do think he needs to show he can be outside a little bit more. Even guys like Cooper Kupp that play the slot a lot, but then they're moving outside as well. Just makes it easier, helps you exploit those matchups. To be a top 5 pick, yeah, I would say he probably needs to, but I also think, Ohio State, you got a real good chance at a title this year. So you do whatever is the best for your football team to do, which is the slot as much as possible. Yeah.
Yeah.
So kind of transitioning from players to teams, I'd first like to talk about Georgia just because of all the guys that they lost on defense. We kind of saw something similar happen with LSU in 2019, like so many NFL draft picks, and they just really haven't recovered from all those guys that went to the NFL, all those coaches that left. We had David Cohn on from Crane and Company for our last episode. He believes that might be more of a culture shot or a culture issue in the building, not necessarily a lack of recruiting or like the ability to get replacements, just maybe more of a cultural issue. But in terms of Georgia, with the guys that they got coming back, do you think this is a team that is capable of competing for that SEC crown, or is there just like absolutely no chance with the amount of bodies that they lost on defense that they're going to even get to that SEC championship game maybe?
Yeah, I mean, they're like the toughest team to evaluate in all college football. It's weird to say because they're really, really good. They recruit well. But as we said, Stetson Bennett's their quarterback. Yeah. I don't know how much I can trust him. Like the scrambling is cool for him. That's awesome. But they have new running backs coming in. They have new defenders coming in. I think it's very possible they can just because they've been recruiting well. So I did have them in my top 4 for the preseason. But at the same time, could they lose to some of these SEC teams and have 2-3 losses this year? Yeah, it's just like their floor is really high, but their ceiling is definitely not as high as it was last year either. So it all depends on what happens around them, kind of like last year, right? UC gets in the playoff because a lot of other teams lost, or Cincinnati, I should say, for national broadcast. Cincinnati gets in the playoff because a lot of other teams lost and they were undefeated. But I could see Georgia being at 9-3 just as easily as I could see them being, I don't know, I wouldn't say undefeated this year, but 11-1 at the end of the regular season, you know?
Yeah, that's just such a hard one. Like we were just talking with the quarterbacks, like we got to see it on the field, like, and they have been recruiting well, but there's just so many players that we just don't know how good they're going to be yet. And I think Ohio State even is kind of one of those teams too. Like, to me, I think they're going to go 11-1 and win the national championship this year. But some of that really is kind of like on projection. Like, we assume that Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka and G. Scott are like, all these guys are going to step in and like have a smooth transition from Garrett Wilson and Chris Olave. We expect that Jim Knowles is going to transform this defense that really had a lot to be desired last year. And he's going to take like these new defensive recruits that they got, and that guys like Jack Sawyer are going to like take those next steps forward. I don't know if they're necessarily in the same boat as Georgia. They didn't lose as many NFL guys, but I think they are one of those teams that it's like, they also are kind of one of those that have a lot to prove, but I think I could see it a little bit more just because we at least got to see at least what Marvin Harrison and Emeka Egbuka could do in a game in that Utah Rose Bowl, regardless of how depleted Utah was that game. We still got to see it on the field. What's your evaluation of Ohio State? Are they a serious national championship contender?
Yeah, I do. I think just having CJ Stroud back is huge. The offensive line always at some point figures it out with all those recruits they got. The defense is the big question. I would say that they're going to be better than last year. That's not too much of a stretch to say, is it? Right? I would hope so. But
just beat Michigan. Just beat like, I'll take a national title, but just please beat Michigan this year. I can't handle another year. I can't. It's torture. It really is.
Yeah, well, like you guys said, right? So like Alabama, we know is up there, right? Ohio State, I would say, is number 2 in this regard. Like, those two teams are the national championship contenders. But you mentioned Michigan. Are we thinking Michigan's that solidified for this year? No. I mean, they lost a lot. I mean, Clemson, after how things went bad for that offense last year, like, yeah, they still won double-digit games, but who else are you going to have besides those two in your top 2 at this point? I know there's people are crazy, but like Texas A&M is another team that's been thrown out. Like, they've never proven it on a max scale. They have to figure out the quarterback situation.
8-4.
So there's like, I think there is like, those two teams are definitely the favorites and the national title contenders in my mind. And then there's so many other teams that like, it could be 3. I know it's kind of the same as the quarterback situation, kind of weirdly, but like Utah might be a team that could be up with the top as a 3rd team in the country at that point. I mean, who knows? Because there's just so many question marks with every other team, and I just don't think we've ever had this before because of people leaving earlier for the NFL draft, the transfer portal, and just honestly Clemson having a dud on offense last year. The defense would be really good this year, but how many games can they win? I don't know.
Yeah. I feel like Texas might even be in that group too. Like, I think they're the one team that they could finish the year 5-7 or 10-2, and neither one would surprise me. Just because even last year, before Quinn Ewers comes in, like with Casey Thompson, they had one of the most insane offenses in college football. But the reason they only went 5-7, I think it was last year, is because the defense was also giving up 60 points a game or whatever the heck it was. Like, I'm exaggerating a little bit there, but I mean, they got to get that defense figured out, man. Like, what do you think? Is Texas one of those teams that can win the Big 12? I feel like with Lincoln Riley stepping away and Oklahoma just losing all these assistants and guys to the portal, that maybe the Big 12 is open. Maybe a team like Baylor could come in, sneak in. Texas could sneak in. Oklahoma State, even with the loss of Jim Knowles, might have some guys back. That's another kind of interesting conference, and maybe the winner of that ends up being a playoff sleeper.
Yeah, I think the Big 12 is wide open this year. Like, I don't think there's a team that's elite. I don't think there's teams that are like
Kansas winning it. They're gonna pull it out this year.
Well, they're gonna beat Texas again, probably, right? So
it's been like 3 years since Texas beat Kansas, which crazy.
Oh,
right. No, I don't think any of them are playoff contenders. I mean, maybe like Oklahoma State goes on a run, the defense doesn't take a hit. Maybe Oklahoma, but you're right. So many people left. It could be, I could see 4 or 5 teams winning the Big 12, and that'll be fun, but I think they're going to beat each other up because there is no elite team there. So it's kind of crazy to me. I mean, Baylor might be a team that stays at the level they were last year, winning the Big 12. I mean, Blake Shapen's the quarterback now. Jerry Bohannon transferred to USF. He lost the job. Shapen is really, really good. In his limited time filling in for the injured Bohannon last year, he was really good. So maybe they could be it. But the Big 12 is going to be a lot of fun this year because I just have no idea.
I do. And I feel like it could even kind of transform into more of a defensive conference. Like Dave Aranda, has changed Baylor from, I mean, just a few years ago, Robert Griffin, this team was a team that was putting up 50 a game. And now, I mean, Dave Aranda, he's got that defensive mind. And Oklahoma State was one of the most elite defenses in college football period last year. And now that Brent Venables is at Oklahoma, like that's a team that could maybe improve defensively. Obviously, Texas and Oklahoma are going to be the SEC soon, but we could maybe see like a totally different Big 12 conference this year.
Yeah, I think figuring out that you can't just score 70 points a game and give up 75 is huge for the Big 12. I mean, Oklahoma State kind of figured it because Oklahoma State, remember several years ago under Mike Gundy, they were scoring a lot of points. And then last year, they weren't really scoring points, but the defense was crazy good. And they came, a goal line stand away from winning the Big 12 last year too. So I think the defense you're right. I think the defense in the conference has gotten a lot better. And I think like it's something that defensive coordinators are becoming more coveted. Like you mentioned that Jim Knowles went to Ohio State. Ohio State is like the offense is figured out and it's awesome, but they didn't go to the playoff last year because that defense was bad. So that's what you have to fix. I mean, that's the biggest thing is the hottest commodity is defense. You can figure out the offense later is kind of the way I would look at it.
Yeah. I'd love to get the temperature of the Notre Dame fan base too from you, because I know you are a Notre Dame fan. But sometimes the loudest fans are the only ones that we hear. And sometimes those tend to be the most delusional ones. I think a lot of Notre Dame fans are excited about Marcus Freeman. They love what the 2023 class is looking like, but there's a lot of Notre Dame fans, a lot of loud ones that we're hearing, especially on the internet. And even some of my friends that follow Notre Dame that think that they got a serious chance to beat Ohio State week one. And
my goodness. I'm
sure Ben would tell them all that they're absolutely insane, but we'd love to hear from you, Joe. Your analysis of Notre Dame, the team that they got currently, and what the fan base as a whole thinks. Maybe you are a little bit different from what the fan base thinks.
Yeah, every team I'm a fan of hates me because I just give it to it objectively, right? Like I don't know, Notre Dame is just the team. They get the 4th spot in the playoffs. They're sometimes good, but the rest of the college football, they're just not quite there, right? That's the whole problem with things is just they're just never quite good enough to beat the very, very top teams, right? Whether that's whoever in the playoff, Clemson, whatever. No, they do not have a chance to beat Ohio State. I'll be very, very surprised if they do. I believe the opening line right now is out, and it is 17.5 points for Ohio State. I think there's a world they beat the spread, but I would not bet on that game because I do think Ohio State probably wins by about.
Your head coach isn't really helping the matter by just ripping his old alma mater like we've done nothing for him. But that's just nothing that I'm holding that against him. But I know Ryan Day has kept that in the back of his head, and I'm sure has pinned it up on the board a few times for Ohio State to get a little frustrated.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, I don't know why he made those comments. You're the underdog. You keep it quiet. You don't talk trash. I mean, they have a very solid roster. They have a very solid, obviously, recruiting future with Marcus Freeman. They're not quite at the level where I'm going to pick them to beat Ohio State. Even if Ohio State's defense is bad, like what playmaker on Notre Dame is going to take advantage of that? Like if Ohio State's defense isn't ready for the game, like will they give up 25 points? Maybe. Will Ohio State still score like 42? Probably. So, there you go. I don't think they have too much of a chance.
It is fascinating. It is fascinating because I wonder this because I grew up right during like when I was a kid, obviously Brady Quinn, obviously that whole era, the whole when I think it was Ohio State played Notre Dame in the Fiesta Bowl, was it? I can't remember.
The Fiesta Bowl, yes. The 05 Fiesta Bowl. Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah. So I grew up, around like this era of like Notre Dame football being like, hey, like, we're going to put, we're going to do something. But it seems like every time they get into a big game, it just seems like they just like, where'd they go? Like, and I don't know, like from the Notre Dame side, right? Like, obviously I see it from an Ohio State perspective, from a non-Notre Dame fan perspective, but it almost feels like it's like Notre Dame has the quality to be there, but it's like the execution for some reason just disappears. Like anytime we see him in the BCS championship game, or we've seen him in the playoff, it's like they all get shell shocked. They get caught up like this frozen, like, why are we here? And like, that's where, again, I go back to why are they not in the Big Ten? And I've said for years, I think they're scared. Like, I don't know if that's the actual thing, but I'm like, if they were in the Big Ten, I truly believe that could help create that kind of like, hey, you're going to face physical teams 10 games out of the year for sure. So I just want to get your perspective on that. Like, why does it seem like they get to this big stage and they just can never get over the hump? They recruit well, they do all this, and then just it's gone.
Yeah, I think Notre Dame is always built well in the trenches, right? Like they always have all these NFL offensive linemen, arguably the best at reducing offensive linemen, maybe Wisconsin too, Alabama, all these guys. But that they can hold up there. But when they get in these big games, I really do think they just lack the playmakers. They've had guys in the past who are kind of good athletes and like all this type of stuff. Like Kyron Williams is a very solid college running back. Is he going to be a great pro? I think he'll be an okay pro maybe, but like where's this guy? Where's the Notre Dame like playmaker like they used to have back in the day, like Tim Brown, you know? Like they don't have those guys. And when they get up into the athletes, you know, that's where it kind of struggles for them. They don't have the athletes to match up. And that's what I think Marcus Freeman's going to change, but we'll have to see how that works out.
Do you think it's the grades, though? Do you think it's the academics, though, too? Do you think that plays a big factor, kind of like you see it in other schools in football that have higher academic standards, that they can't maybe necessarily get the guys they always want because there's a certain standard that maybe guys are looking at like, do I want to hit that standard all the time? Like, you know, not saying that they don't want to, but, you know, there's that like tug and pull.
I think it's partially that. I think it's academics are important. I know Brian Kelly got them to lower the academic standards, which did help a little bit.
Yeah.
But also I think, you know, you want to come to South Bend, Indiana to play for us? We haven't won a big game. We haven't won a New Year's Six bowl in since I forget what the date is.
It's been a long time.
It's been a long time. You want to come up here? Our offense has never been great. Our last quarterback who was drafted in the first round, Deshaun Kaiser, didn't really work out. He's the best quarterback they've recruited since Jimmy Clausen, and they really haven't had anyone close. Like their offenses have been lackluster with Ian Book and Tommy Rees and all these guys who are just not Notre Dame caliber quarterbacks. I think there's just plenty of reasons why recruits wouldn't go and don't want to follow in the footsteps of these other guys who just haven't panned out either.
You might have that dude though, CJ Carr, coming up 2024, stealing from Lloyd Carr and the Michigan faithful out there. But before we leave Notre Dame, I want to ask you, now that we've seen kind of what Notre Dame has done since hiring Marcus Freeman and what LSU is doing with Brian Kelly, like, I'm sure you guys love that you finally got Kelly out of there. Like this dude just seems to be making a fool of himself with like these fake accents.
Southern accent down there and down
he's
there.
Also like losing some of these top recruits in the state of Louisiana. Like traditionally, like top receivers and top corners, like they go to LSU, and some teams won't even like try to take them because it's like a surefire thing. They're going to LSU, but he's starting to lose some of those guys in. He couldn't bring his coordinators over with him, like both offensive and defensive, like Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees both passed up making the trip there. He did lose his defensive backs coach to Florida, Corey Raymond. But it's kind of shocking that Brian Kelly was even able to have this much success that he had at Notre Dame, like seeing everything unfold here.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, was he the best coach in the last 20 years for Notre Dame? Yes. Is it time for him to move on? Absolutely yes. The stories about his coaching and his tenure have not been greatest either. Like you mentioned that he didn't get guys to follow him to LSU, like assistant coaches, and sometimes the recruits too. I forget, there's a story out there, not me reporting it, it's out there, I believe, but Robert Salah, who's in the NFL now, and one other NFL coach, I forget who it is, I'll have to look that up, but they were like graduate assistants, and like they had to shovel snow at his house for a party he was having. Like he invited him over for a party, and they ended up having to shovel snow. And like, you know, the grad assistants work so many hours, like doing the stupid stuff in the mail, helping get tape together. You had him over to your house to shovel for a Christmas party or something. It was something like that. So I've heard stuff like that in the past where he's just not the greatest to work with. And that could explain, Josh, why people aren't following him. I also think I'm very happy to have Marcus Freeman at Notre Dame. I think he can be successful. Remains to be seen if he will, or if he can even match the success of Brian Kelly, right? But I think we can all agree Brian Kelly is like an absolute terrible fit in the South at LSU too. Like I don't know.
What do you mean down there, Joe? I mean, if you only got to go down the accent right down there right now. That's all you got to do.
That's right. Family. All right. Yeah. And then he does the TikTok dances with the eye stuff. I mean, it's I don't think it's going to be a fun time in the SEC for him. There was reports that he wanted to leave the past couple of years as well. So good for him. We'll see what this turns out to be. I don't think it's a good fit at all. Someone said they
wanted if Fickle took the job to Notre Dame, they wanted him back. They wanted him to go to Cincinnati. And I had a friend go, really? Cincinnati? No, you can leave. Yeah, you can just go somewhere else. Like, it's just Brian Kelly to me is like, it's like, okay, I'm going to say this, and Josh might know where I'm headed with this. It's like the Brady joke of Michigan era, like just the personality, like the like he's more successful, obviously, but to me, it's like this, like, what are you doing there? Like, it's that whole like why? And I just feel like going down to LSU, I feel like he's going to try to overcompensate and he's going to try to do everything so much bigger and better and all these different things. And I'm like, dude, who are you going to bring in? Who are you going to bring in? Like, if you're losing guys from Louisiana, then tell me what kid is going to leave state of Texas, state of Florida. We've already seen Ohio State go down to Florida and Georgia and swap guys. You don't think they're going to go down to LSU now in that area and go, hey, you know what? We'll take him and him and him. And so it's very interesting to me because Brian Kelly is one that I think it's like there's a few coaches where I look and like they haven't always adapted to the new age of football. And I feel like he's on the cusp of kind of like falling out of the whole new age of wage transitioning. Dabo Swinney feels like he's always there trying to fix him. You know, he's just slipping as well. So my question to you is, do you think that Notre Dame, do you think in 3 years, will Marcus Freeman either have brought them to a playoff or will Brian Kelly be fired from LSU in 3 years?
Oof. I'd say both could happen. I think, right? Like, I think Notre Dame could slide in as that fourth team once again. They've done it, twice now? So they could slide right in as the fourth team, be fine, probably get killed by 20 points again and be just fine there. The recruiting classes coming in are great. I mean, they've okay players on the roster right now. Notre Dame doesn't really lose that many players anyway. But and yeah, I think Brian Kelly could definitely be fired. Like, Ed Orgeron obviously had some off the field issues at LSU. It was kind of played into why he got fired. But the 1 year after a national championship, they have a bad year, and then it's like, all right, we're out on this guy. So it's just, I could see him being fired for sure. I mean, I know his agent did a good job building that money up, but LSU, I mean, if you don't win, they give you every resource to try to win that's out there. So if they're losing recruits, if they start losing these games, if someone takes LSU's like second spot in the SEC West behind Alabama, if Texas A&M takes that, and then all these other teams move up and they keep on moving down, they'll be quick to act. I mean, the money is always a factor, but LSU fans never have worries about that. They'll always pay up to get a new coach.
No doubt, man. Like, the way that A&M's been recruiting, like they're
not recruiting, Josh. They're not recruiting. They're just
buying, recruiting, whatever. You know what I mean? They're getting talent in the building. And Ole Miss, I feel like Lane Kiffin's got them on the right track too. And it's like very easily LSU might fall off here. And if it is a cultural issue, like what David Cohn was saying, like, it doesn't sound like Brian Kelly's going to be able to help that too much. No. But I'm very high on Marcus Freeman too. I feel like that when you saw the players react in the locker room, when he got that head coaching, when he got tabbed the head coach, it was just like, they love Marcus. And I really love seeing Marcus. I hope he continues to be successful out there too. But let's move on to some more college football landscape discussion. Wildest offseason, as we said earlier, I think in history, just with everything that went down, all the rule changes, all the conference realignment, the NIL stuff. First off, Joe, I would just like to kind of get a gauge for how you feel about NIL in general. Are you for NIL, or are you of the nature of players are getting free scholarships? That's
be careful, Josh.
That all that they need.
No, I'm for NIL, and the reason for it is guys like Marcus Lattimore from South Carolina, who tore up his knee and just never made it in the pro. I think he 49ers training camp or whatever, but that's the reason why I like NIL. But I don't like necessarily how, kind of like Jordan Addison, all these promises are being made to these kids, and they jump ship from school to school, and sometimes
nothing signed either, really.
Right. So that's the part where I don't like. But in general, yes, I like it because I want guys like Marcus Lattimore who pour their hearts and soul out for their college team to get something for it,
For sure. Yeah. I'm kind of along the same lines too. Like, I've always thought that name, image, and likeness was something that just made sense. Like, if you're going to go back to your hometown and you want to run a football camp and charge like, $50 for people to participate, like that just made sense. Right. Or if like you're at school and a coach wants to take you out to lunch, like you shouldn't be penalized for that. Or like with Chase Young, with like flying his family out, like that whole thing, stupid. It was just like, there's so many like stupid things that's just like, okay, NIL just makes so much sense.
Legislation. That's what's needed.
But the way that I thought it would go down is like maybe you get like some of these elite college prospects like Zion Williamson or Trevor Lawrence, and they're signing like $1 million deals with Nike, right? Like I kind of thought it would just be like the top 1% that are like really dominating the college game that are probably going to transition to pros. And it would just allow these companies that are already going to sign these guys anyway, once they become pros, like get it a little bit earlier, give them a little bit more money. And it also gives like some of the smaller like school guys opportunities to maybe develop relationships with local businesses and like maybe get a burger named after them and things like that. Like that's how I kind of saw NIL going. I never thought it would turn into boosters handing recruits $8 million to come play for their alma mater. And I think the lack of legislation is what has led to this overall. Would you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, unfortunately, the NCAA is in a bind here, right? Because this is what happened as a result of the court of law. So how do you regulate someone's marketability from a booster's perspective? How are you supposed to say you can't make this money on your image and likeness after it was just ruled that you can? That's what I don't know how it gets fixed is I guess the problem. Like, is it a problem? Probably. Is there a way to fix it that anyone has stated, like to regulate it with the law being the big thing behind it? Not that I know of. I mean, I have no idea.
Yeah, I'm kind of looking forward to like these broken promises. Like we're already seeing it with Jordan Addison, but also like the boosters, I think eventually are gonna have their egos get in the way. And since coaches aren't allowed to give any intel on who they want or have any say, that is the rule.
Sure?
One of the only rules that they actually have with NIL.
Jimbo supposedly said something different. I mean, I'm just saying. Again,
well,
I don't know
for the other 129 FBS schools, Ben, this is I'm talking about
right.
them.
Yeah. Got it. Yep.
But I think you're going to start seeing like these boosters, like they're going to shell out $8 million to like these freshmen, and
they're
going to be on the bench. They're going to be on the bench. They might even be a kid that like that head coach didn't even want. And then you're going to start seeing like a little bit of tension there. And they're going to be like, I paid all this money, like, so you could get this kid and he's not even playing. Like, what the heck? You know what I mean? Like, I think we're going to start seeing some of those like broken deals and like angry boosters. And it's just going to create like this potentially very funny madness.
You know what I think though, that is interesting that just bothers me. I'm a former long snapper. And I have not heard any long snapper get a deal of any sort of money. I'm just going to be honest. Being a long snapper is a very stressful job. You have to make sure that ball is right back to the holder or the punter within a certain amount of time. I'm just saying, what's up with none of the freaking long snappers or the freaking holders or the kickers or the punters getting millions of dollars? I'm just saying we can win or lose you games. Literally, I might have caused my team to lose a game or two. So I'm just saying, I think that there should be compensation for, us guys that, have our heads between our legs staring at the punter's face to see when he wants to snap the ball.
Do you remember too, Ben, when Ryan Day was trying to assess how much money it might take to just keep the guys on their team?
Oh, dude, it's ridiculous.
And he had QB like $2 million. Yeah. But we're already seeing 8-figure deals go down to some of these quarterbacks. And it's like,
what's the long snapper then? $1? Or what are we going to give him, a foot long? Is that what it's going to be now? Jeez, I'm just saying.
I guess so, man. Yeah.
Ridiculous. Absolutely
crazy, Joe. What do you think might be some potential solutions? Do you think that the NCAA ever regulates this, or do you think that it's just going to kind of like burn to the ground as it is and it's going to have to be built back up maybe?
I think what you said, it's going to self-regulate because these boosters are going to go pay millions of dollars for a kid and he's going to end up being a bust. And then they're going to be like, do I want to pay the next kid? I don't know. So I think it'll regulate itself a little bit. I think that it's probably never going to be totally fixed. Like the whole, how many years we do should college athletes be paid? And this is like the only way that it makes sense, because if you have to do it a different way with how football makes money and how you have Title IX, you have to keep the women's sports too. How are you going to decide who makes what money if it comes down to like paying from the universities, right? This at least is like, hey, your name recognition or whatever, we're going to give you something because you're a 5-star recruit. At least there's like that part of it. I don't know how it gets fixed. We never figured out how to pay college athletes in a fair way with Title IX, with everything else, from like a standpoint of from the universities. How are we going to figure out this wild, wild west? It's got to self-regulate, I think, is the only way.
Yeah, I think that's eventually how it's going to be too. that's interesting about the women's sports too, just because they're the ones that aren't really bringing in the revenue, and all the football players are the ones that, I mean, it's basically the same across the board. Like football, men's basketball, they're the ones that are kind of bringing in all this revenue. So to have any kind of like, if you were to eventually go into like universities paying salaries, like I really don't know how that would work. Like you said, because the schools would probably go broke then, right? Like they would be using the whole entire like women's basketball budget, like to pay the players, and then they don't have any money for like uniforms and stuff like that. So it's like, I think NIL is definitely the fairest way to go about it. But again, back to like the way that I initially thought NIL would go, I would have thought it would have been like the guys that are actually on the field, making the plays, making the highlights, putting the schools on the map that were going to get this money. I didn't think it was going to be 3 stars that haven't done anything on the field yet that are getting like all this money. Like last year, Quinn Ewers made more money than CJ Stroud did.
Yep.
It's nice.
I have no idea the solution. This is like big brained things. We need to get all the smartest minds in the world to fix this issue, especially with the law.
Like the government
stuff. I don't know, the Albert Einstein of our era, whoever that might be. I have no idea. Just come in here. Let's get them in a room, a think tank. They're not allowed to leave until they figure out how to pay college.
Dr. Fauci.
Right.
Elon Musk, maybe. Yeah. I think another reason. Were you going to say something, Ben?
No, I'm just laughing at myself.
Oh, yeah, you do that a lot. But I think another thing that's really kind of made this NIL stuff go kind of wild is the way that the transfer portal has kind of moved too, because now we have like basically the ability. And I'm hearing people advocate that superstars should be basically going to the portal every year just to test the market again and see if maybe they can get a larger NIL deal elsewhere. And it's like, why wouldn't you do that? Like people thought that Bryce Young, after he won the Heisman, immediately should have entered the portal, and maybe not necessarily to leave Alabama, but just to test and see, like, you know, could I maybe get a bigger NIL deal if I went to USC or, you know, something like that. And I think the way that the transfer portal is working right now also isn't really going to help this out too much.
No, it's not. The rule is still you get a one-time transfer for free, right? You don't have to sit out to transfer one. But the second time people transfer, they're just giving out the waivers like they're candy. Like it's crazy. In a real sense, should they be able to hop universities? Yes, but does the money really kind of make it worse with that? Yeah, and should Bryce Young leave Alabama? Heck no. Like you got to think about your future here too a little bit. If he signs on with Boston College because someone in Boston wants him up in Boston, like, is that going to be better for him long term? No. So, yeah, I don't know. It's the whole, like, with conference realignment too, like the whole landscape is changing. It's all about the money, the TV contracts, Fox, ESPN, Disney, whatever. And it's hard. Like, am I still going to watch every Saturday? Absolutely. Is it hard to figure out what the next step is at this rate? Like, yeah, absolutely it is. I have no idea.
Yeah. Conference realignment is going to be interesting too. I feel like the way that the SEC and the Big Ten are working right now, like eventually we'll get to like 2 mega conferences, and we'll kind of have a situation where it's like the AFC and the NFC and the NFL. And maybe that changes the way that the playoff goes too. And maybe say the Big Ten has like maybe just 10, 11 regular season games, and then they kind of have like a 4-16 playoff for like a champion. And the SEC kind of does the same thing. And then that way they're still kind of keeping it to like a 15, 16 game season for that team that makes it to the national championship. And it's a little bit more fair because it's like the SEC right now, like out of Oklahoma, Texas A&M, Alabama, Georgia, Florida, LSU, it's like, I mean, you very easily could have 4 playoff teams from that conference alone. And I don't think the rest of the conferences would be too happy if the playoff continued to just be 4 teams from one conference.
Yeah, the conference realignment is going to make the playoff tougher, right? Like it's going to make it harder to figure out if it does become an NFL or NFC versus AFC type of thing. You're right. How many conference games do you get?
Notre Dame screwed.
Scheduling like? Right. But like, how do you do the schedules? Is the schedule fair? Like all these different things that come up. And it's going to dilute what I hate about it is going to dilute the regular season games. Like some of those like Ohio State, Penn State games like may not be as big of a deal. Like if Ohio State slips up, they may not go to the playoff, right? Now, if you have these big conferences and make it then trend towards NFL type playoffs, okay, Ohio State loses at Penn State, no big deal. And I think that's what those Ohio State games are always fun to watch, but I think that's what college football like makes it real, right? If you slip up, your national championship could be over. The 14 playoffs kind of diluted it a little bit, but not all the way. So I think that's what it could lose, and I think we could have people who just tune out during the regular season, like, oh, okay, well they play the week 14 game against Ohio State, Michigan, but if they lose, they're still in the Big Ten championship. They just got to win that, and then they're in. And I think that like for the casual fans, that's what's going to happen. They might see numbers go down, and that could be bad for them long term. But I think you mentioned Josh Pate earlier. He's the guy who said like, yeah, am I not happy where it's going? Am I still going to watch? Yes, and the only thing that can change is just people turning off their TVs, and I think it could happen with that type of style.
Yeah, me and Ben tend to be more on the traditional side of college football. We love college football for like that intense regular season. Like it doesn't
rivalries
compare to anybody else's. Like the most important regular season in all of sports, period. The rivalries, the traditions. It's what makes college football, I think, unique and different from the NFL. And I really love all those aspects. And I feel like with the way that the portal and NIL and like this conference realignment's going, like it's eventually going to turn into maybe like a minor league kind of NFL. And it's like, we kind of see the USFL and the XFL. And it's like, nobody really cares about those leagues because they're not the NFL. It's just like lesser skilled guys. And I feel like college football, like other than the fact that like the guys in that league are going to be the future of the NFL, it's like you really lose kind of the draw and what makes college football great.
You do. And I think what the biggest complaint I've heard about college football the last several years, like I love it. It's not everyone's thing. A lot of people still like pro sports or say like, oh, I'll see them when they get to the pros, right? Is the biggest complaint is, oh, it's always Alabama, Clemson, Ohio State, and then pick a fourth team, right? It's always the same teams. What do you think the transfer portal is going to do for that? Like all these guys who produce at other colleges are just going to go to Alabama. Like Jahmyr Gibbs, the Georgia Tech running back who's a star, went to Alabama. The Eli Ricks from LSU, corner, went to Alabama. Like
Burton, that wide receiver from Georgia, Alabama, you're right. It's a power vacuum that's going to make it worse, and it's going to have these same teams be good. And again, I don't know how to regulate it, but even if we do a 16-team playoff, like could someone upset Alabama? Sure, but we've seen it at the FCS level too. Like North Dakota State just picks everyone. They just beat them all, and that's what they've won a lot of championships. I don't know what the number is anymore.
It's a lot. Yeah.
The only one they lost in the recent memory, I believe, is the year that was the shortened COVID year because Trey Lance went pro and then they had to get a new guy in. I think it does create way more problems for college football in that regard too. Is like if a guy from Georgia Tech, a really good running back from Georgia Tech, is going to just move on over to Alabama and not have to sit out a year, then that's going to make Alabama stay at the top. And what we love, or at least what I love about college football is, some of those years like 2007 where we had Kansas and Missouri out of nowhere come in and be top teams, and Kentucky beats LSU and LSU ends up winning the national championship, but they have 2 losses because there's so much chaos happened. Like just the feeling that like anything could happen was there, and it's still kind of there, right? Alabama comes to Ohio State, sure, but like it's still UC made the playoff, Cincinnati made the playoff last year. Things can happen, but it's going to be lost forever if this kind of keeps on the same trend of like these star players just keep on booting over to Alabama or whatever,
Yeah, that's an aspect I forgot to mention too that I've thought about too, is like these lower level Power 5 teams or the higher level G5 teams. Like they're never going to be able to get that empire. Like you're never going to see like another UCF situation or another Boise State situation, because once those kids break out, they're immediately going to transfer to like an Alabama, Georgia, Ohio State, or something like that, somewhere where they can play, get cameras on them, get scouts on them, and get more NIL money. And those teams are never going to have a chance. Like you said, it's going to keep those top teams at the top. Like all these moves people thought were going to like level the playing field more. I think it's just going to further spread the gap.
Yeah. And that's not good for college football. If that's the biggest thing. The only thing I could see could maybe equalize it is the 3 teams I mentioned that are always at the top besides Clemson right now, but we'll assume they're still there for the time being, just for the sake of the argument. Is if like Nike pays the players $1 billion or like Maryland has Under Armour money, they start paying.
Phil Knight, Kevin Plank, we're talking to you.
Yeah, right. Yeah. It's the only thing I can think of that would even somewhat stabilize or like have some other teams that like kind of level it off. But that's just a power vacuum, man. That's not good for sports at all. So,
yeah. Well, dang, man, we've been talking about a lot of stuff. I've definitely enjoyed it, Joe. I don't want to wrap it up yet unless Ben has something else on his mind that maybe we haven't touched on yet, but I've been having a blast here talking college football.
All I'll say is that I think that Notre Dame versus Ohio State is going to be, I will say this, as much as I give you harp about Notre Dame, I did want to say this before we went, is I think it's going to be one of those games that could be because of the Indiana, Ohio kind of like roots, high school, like my favorite thing about college football, right, was watching my high school play on Friday night, waking up in the morning, watching game day, then watching, college football game. And there's just some about this Notre Dame Ohio State game that just, I think for maybe some of the old heads as well, like my dad, sorry, Dad. But for some of that age, that this is like, maybe this is going to be something that's other than just Michigan, right? Or other than Penn State. It's a game that, hey, maybe they start talking, be like, hey, every 3 years, we start doing this thing, or every other year or whatever. But I will say, I want to get your take on it. What do you think the score prediction? I know you said that there's, they're going to beat the spread. You think that's a possibility. What do you think is going to be the outcome of the game? And what do you think is going to be, what do you think at the end of the time, we're going to see the final score? What do you think it will be?
All right, I'll go with, I'll say 45-25, because you can't always pick like straight touchdown score. You got to smooth stuff a little bit there. I think it'll be close for at least the start. Jitters get out. It's the first weekend. It's college game day, 2 historic programs, and we love the scheduling of it, obviously. Cam Hart for Notre Dame, Isaiah Foskey for Notre Dame, good defensive players, maybe have some big plays in the first half. But that Ohio State offense is nothing to mess with. So I think they do score a lot of points. I don't think Notre Dame has the playmakers to do it. Tyler Buckner had some good plays last year, but there was a 3-quarterback system and the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life.
For sure.
They have some good young receivers that just aren't proven, but yeah, I think it's going to be like a first quarter, maybe a little bit of a game and maybe a little bit of a juice going, but then Ohio State will pull away. Just CJ Stroud and those receivers are too good, man.
Yeah, I think it's going to be it'll be a fun game. I really wish I could go. I like living here in Hungary. I'm always like, man, that's one game I wish I could go to, because it's like the one game, right? It's September in Ohio. That it's like not going to be freaking cold. It's going to be like semi good weather to like just watch a football game.
And I believe it's a night game too.
Yeah, and a night in the shoe, I'm just saying, is something else. But no, I'm interested to see what happens. And again, Marcus Freeman really should have kept his mouth shut. That's all I want to say, because I've been hearing rumblings from Columbus, and there's a lot of people saying that the players are kind of ticked off right now, and old school players. And sorry, James Laurinaitis, I'm sorry. Like, you know what? You want to go over and join your buddy, you can. It's fine. Whatever. I don't care. But no, it is funny though. But I will say this, I think it's crazy. And I think we talked to Chris last week, Josh, and I debated with him about the rivalry of Ohio State, Michigan, but I'm honestly more excited to watch what's going to happen in this Ohio State Notre Dame game than I am about the Ohio State Michigan game, because I have a feeling that Ohio State's going to go in and just whoop Michigan. And I don't think it's going to be close to Michigan. I think this game, for me, is going to be a little closer. I have it right now at 42. Again, I'm with you. I have like 41-30. I think Notre Dame's I think the defense won't be quite ready. I want to say it will be, but I don't think Ohio State's defense will be quite ready. I think they do beat the spread, and I think it's going to be one of those games where it could be at halftime a 24-20 game, 24-17 game. But I do think you'll see Stroud go, okay, it's time to turn up the notch on the car and hit the accelerator. I think you're going to have too many weapons, and I don't know if Notre Dame defensive backs can stay with all the weapons. And, oh, by the way, they also have Travion Henderson. And, oh, by the way, they have Mayan Williams. Oh, and Royer. Oh, and on top of that, they also have, all these other receivers. So if someone could point to me where Notre Dame's going to be able to stop Ohio State on that opening weekend, then awesome. But I just don't see it happening in that way, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, no, I can totally agree with that. The only way that Notre Dame wins this game is if Ohio State comes out flat like they did against Minnesota to open last season. It's not going to happen this year because Stroud's been there, done that before. It's also a home game. There's buzz on around. There's not it's not a sleeper game in Minnesota. It's against Notre Dame in the shoe. they'll be ready to go. I think even if things don't go exactly as planned to start, they're not going to have as bad of a half as they did against Minnesota for sure.
Absolutely.
Good news for Notre Dame too, I think, is since that Ohio State game is week 1, even if they lose it, I think there's enough tough games on their schedule with like BYU, Clemson, USC that if they run the table and win like the next 11, there's still that chance that they can make the playoffs. Obviously, it depends. Obviously, it depends on like what the rest of the field does, but it's like, hey, the best time to lose is like pretty early on, I feel like too. But thank you so much for joining us, Joe. It's been a pleasure chatting with you as always. Would you go ahead and plug in your social media with the Game Haus and your personal stuff? People definitely got to check you out and follow you. Go ahead and tell them where they can find you.
Yeah, you can find my articles on the gamehaus.com. That's Haus. It's spelled like the German way for some reason. And you can find their Twitter at TGH Sports, and then find me at Ditullio Joe. I will not spell that for you, but it sounds exactly like.
I'll put it below you down there, so you.
It actually sounds like you'd like it's spelled. So.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, there you go. You can find me there.
Awesome. Yeah, we appreciate you coming on, Joe, because again, Josh and I need to learn about how to actually do correct mock drafts. So for next year, we can actually be somewhat correct. But no, we appreciate your knowledge, and it's enlightening when we hear that actually someone studies the game more than we do, I think, combined. But no, we appreciate you coming on. Again, you're always welcome to come on to the Baseline Podcast. For all of you out there listening, go ahead and check all their stuff out. Read his articles, look at his mock drafts, compare them to ours, and see how wrong we are, and then maybe trust us again. But if you loved the show this week on YouTube, go ahead and click that thumbs up button. Hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell. You can watch all the episodes. You'll have the one with David Cohn that came out just a little bit ago when this comes out, and then you also have the one with Chris, and now you have one with Joe. We're just lining up some amazing people to come on the show. So check us out, and also if you want to follow updates on our Instagram, it's at baseline.podcast, where you can see all the new things that are coming out. We'll have little clips from the show that will be coming out hopefully soon. And then also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, go ahead and give us a nice rating. 5 stars. That's all you got to do. It's like when you stay at an Airbnb. Just give us a good rating. That's all we ask. But hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we will see you next week. Well, I won't see you next week, but there'll be someone stepping in for me next week. But yeah, until then, we'll see you guys. Peace.